Hey folks, very good to see you, very good to see you. Emily Oden here from the London Buddhist Centre Shrine Room. So very good to have you joining with us. And do say hello, put your name into the chat box and say hello and say where you're coming from as well. I'm furiously being told my case is off, so hopefully that's good. So do put your name into the chat box and say hello, say where you're tuning in from. So yeah, a rainy day here in London, but nice and warm and bright here in the LBC Shrine Room. Really good to have you here. And yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to wrap up the final of the Vimalakirti Nirdesa series that we've been running for the last, it must be 6 to 8 weeks or so. And yeah, it's been really fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. And I hope a number of you have been tuning in each week. I'd imagine you have. In fact, I know you have. So we're going to have the final of them this evening. We're going to have a Akashamitra talk on the theme of how not to love. How not to love. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that. And we'll run our usual series. We'll run a talk. The Akashamitra I'll do a meditation now for a bit. Akashamitra will talk on the theme. We'll have a break and then we'll have a question and answers session then after that as well. So if we have any hellos from the chat box, Benji, you can shout them out.
It's just Mircha so far.
Is it? Oh, hi Mircha,
really
how you doing?
Every time he's such a loyal.
Really good to have Mircha there with us.
Wouldn't be an evening.
No, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So good to see you here, Mircha, and tuning in from London. But yes, if you're here, do say hello in the chat box.
We've got Liz from Tasmania.
Oh wow, fantastic. Hi Liz from Tasmania. Probably very warm, obviously very warm down in Tasmania now. So although Tasmania from recollection is rainy, yeah, that's right. I was lucky enough to live in Melbourne for a while, and I remember people telling me that Tasmania was actually similar to Irish weather. But very good to have you join with us, Liz, yeah, even though it's raining.
Sophia says hello from Hackney.
Hi Sophia from Hackney, good to have you join.
And we've got Tristy from Graham in Italy.
Oh, hi Tristy from Italy. Really good to have you here as well.
Got Sed from Norfolk.
Hi Seb.
And Rosalind saying hello from Brighton.
Oh, hi Rosalind from Brighton, great. Well, very good to have you all here with us this evening. So what we'll do, as I said, we'll do a little bit of meditation now, and I'll just lead us through a body scan. Then Akashamitra will talk on the theme, and then we'll come back together after that, after a brief break. So why don't you just set up in your meditation postures now, and we'll dim the lights here as well. I'll give people a minute just to set themselves up. Just bringing our awareness, our awareness to a sense of connection with the floor, with the cushion, with the stool. So we're basically looking to get a sense of groundedness, of stability. Just allowing the mind to slow. Noticing the effect on the mind as well when we bring our awareness to the connection with the floor and the cushion. Allowing the floor to take all our weight as well. So just allowing all the muscles to relax. First we can just scan through the body, looking to relax any points of tension. So relaxing the thighs, relaxing the gut, relaxing the shoulders down away from the ears. If you're just struggling to let go of any particular tension, you can imagine that area relaxing. It might help. So allowing the muscles of the face to relax. So the jaw, the lips, notice through the meditation that at points habitual tension might creep in again. So they can often come back in without us even realizing it. We hold points of tension in the body so habitually. So we can learn to come back to the body, particularly in meditation, and checking for any holding, any tightening, and just relaxing that area again. So you can just see if there's anything in your awareness as well that you're looking to push away from or leave out of the meditation. So anything that's uncomfortable or unpleasant. Might be anger or boredom or anxiety. And particularly how you might feel those things physically in the body. All our mental states have a physical co-arising. So just noticing them in the body and just allowing them to be there. Not trying to push them away. Not wishing them away. Just relaxing into their presence. Bring our awareness now to settle on the sensations of the breath. narrowing too much down on the breath, allowing it to be there as part of our entire experience. So aware of it as part of our entire experience. And our entire experience includes our body, our emotions, the sounds in the room, maintaining a broad awareness. And then relaxing any effort we're making in the meditation now. So just sitting with the fruits of the practice for a moment. Okay, folks, good. So I'll hand over to Akashamitra now, who'll talk on the topic, and then see you in a bit. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Emily Yodin. Good evening, everyone. Really nice to see you all. My name's Akashamitra, and I'm co-leading the class with Emily Yodin tonight. Really good to be with you all, and thanks for that meditation, Emily Yodin. It's the final evening of our series on the Vimalakirti Nirdesa this evening, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about who the central character is, Vimalakirti, so who he is and what he represents. But I'm actually going to start off by talking about something that might seem completely different, but is very, very relevant to what I'm going to talk about this evening. And so it's a story, something that happened to me this week, and it's work-related. So it's something that came through to me at work this week. So I work for an organisation that funds organisations in India. We fundraise in the UK, and we send money to India and Nepal. And we work with about 50 different organisations in India and Nepal. And what they do is kind of social development projects, community development projects with very, very, very poor communities. So they work with people who are extremely disadvantaged and extremely poor because of the particular social strata that they've been born into. They face a lot of discrimination, a lot of disadvantage. I got this delightful communication this week, which is about one of the projects that I work very closely with, that I've been working with for about 6 or 7 years. And this organisation is an organisation that works in West Bengal, and they work with very, very, very poor communities there, and they work on girls' education. And so in that part of the world, girls often drop out of school very, very early, so as early as 8, 9, 10 if they go to school at all, and they're often forced into early marriage, so they're often forced to get married as young as 11 or 12, and not a marriage in the way that we would think of it, but they're forced into more or less domestic slavery. They're at risk of trafficking. They're at risk of being sold into the sex trade, basically because those communities are extremely, extremely poor. Most girls there drop out of school very, very young. And the project that we fund is helps girls to stay in school, basically, and complete their education, and stops them from being forced into early marriage. And I got a lovely communication this week, which was that so the project that we fund works with 1,000 girls every year, and it's worked with thousands of girls over the last few years, last 6-7 years since I've been working with them. And for the very first time, a girl in the project has got her master's degree. So a young woman called Banani has got her master's degree in the last couple of months. So I don't know if you can imagine what that's like, but coming from a community where education is just, for a girl to even get to graduation at the age of 16 or 18, or even to get her degree would just be a complete dream. But to get a master's degree is absolutely incredible. So this was the subject of much, much rejoicing in the project. She's obviously very, very proud of herself. I was immensely proud of what they've achieved and what she's achieved. And now what she's doing is she's carrying on her studies. She wants to become a teacher, and she is offering tuition to girls in her community for free. So she's doing tuition classes for girls in her community for free, and kind of giving back in that way. So it's almost impossible to conceive that something like that would happen in that part of the world with these girls. Before the project started working there, it's just something that they never ever thought this kind of thing could happen. So how does that happen then? How does the impossible happen? It takes certain conditions, doesn't it? Certain conditions need to be present. So we know this is a central teaching of Buddhism, is that certain conditions need to be present in order for certain things to happen. And in this case, the conditions are the organisation needs to exist, and our organisation needs to exist. They need money, they need donors, and they need people working tirelessly for the greater good, and people working tirelessly for something more than themselves. So I'm going to leave Banani there, but I am going to come back to her through the evening. And you might be asking yourselves, okay, well, what does this have to do with Vimalakirti? And I hope that will become clear as I carry on talking. So that is the subject of this evening, is talking about Vimalakirti. And we've been looking at this text, Vimalakirti Nirdesa. And so who is Vimalakirti? That's the question that I want to start with. And I don't think we can really answer that question. All we can do is kind of explore that topic a little bit. But what I would say is, on one level, he appears to be an ordinary person. So he's a businessman, he's a father, he's a householder. But those things aren't really important in the story or in the text, in the Vimalakirti Nirdesa. It's not about his interaction with his kids, or that he had, a really good month in the business that he was running. The important thing about him, that we know about him, is he's what's called a Bodhisattva. So he is a kind of an ideal. He's not real, he's a fictional character. And he's an ideal. That's what the Bodhisattva is. It's an ideal. It's a vision of what a human being could be. It's a vision of what a human being can be with the right conditions. And a Bodhisattva is a being who has completely, totally dedicated themselves to the uplift and the welfare of other beings, basically. They only respond to suffering in the world. There is no concern for themselves. They're only concerned with the uplift of others. So they're not an ordinary being. They're not an ordinary being like us. And I was thinking a bit about this over the last couple of days, and I was thinking, in a way, you could say they're a bit like a superhero. And we know that Vimalakirti has certain superpowers in the text. So he can magic up certain lands at will. He seems to be telepathic. So he has these kind of superpowers. And so he's a bit like a superhero. And you might think I'm being a little bit flippant there, but actually I'm not. I think that actually is a kind of a fair comparison because, in every age and in every culture, we kind of dream up these beings, don't we? Like in ancient Greece, they would have had Zeus. In Norse mythology, we've got Thor. Every age sort of needs its ideal to kind of aspire to, basically. And these stories about these kind of magical beings tell us something about our own life and our place within it. And I think, we don't really, I'll come to this in a bit, but we don't really have that so much in our culture. And superheroes are kind of the closest that we get to these kind of beings, I think. When I was a kid, I was really, really into Superman. So like the kind of 70s version of Superman. I don't know what the age is of the people who are watching, but there was a film, particularly Superman 2. And I think partly the attraction for me was kind of late 70s New York and just kind of how cool all of that was. But I was sort of obsessed with Superman and how sort of beautiful and how graceful he was, but also just this idea that somebody had superpowers and they would use them to help ordinary human beings, basically. I remember in Superman 2 there's this moment where the world's being destroyed, and everybody's going like, where's Superman? Where's Superman? And they're all just kind of waiting for him to come. So you could say like the Bodhisattva is a superhero of wisdom and compassion, or a superhero of love. He appears in the world just like a superhero would to end suffering, basically. And Vimalakirti, who's a Bodhisattva, does this by one of the ways that he does this. So he does this in all sorts of different ways. You might remember, if you've been at talks over the last few weeks, we talk about his skillful means. But one of the ways that he does this is that he encourages us to go beyond what we think we're capable of. So time and time again, he stops us, or he stops the people in the text from settling down, basically, from thinking that they've made it. Anytime anyone in the text stops with their own development or thinks they've made it, he will encourage them sometimes quite directly, to go beyond themselves. So we see this in the text even with enlightened beings. There's a famous episode in the text where these enlightened beings are told basically that there is more, and lots of them kind of get up and walk out of this assembly because they're so they're so challenged by this, basically. So he's always encouraging everybody to go beyond themselves, to go beyond what they think they're capable of. So what he represents is our desire to go beyond our limitations. But he's both a guide and an example in that way. So he's a guide that tells us how to do that, and he's an example of somebody who has done that himself. But we need to remember that this is not literal. So it's not, there isn't like literally a being Vimalakirti, but what he represents is that, basically. And you could say poetically that whenever anybody goes beyond themselves in the direction of higher values, in the service of serving higher values like wisdom and compassion and care and love, you could say that he appears in the world. So it's like we summon him into our world. But there's a couple of things I want to say about that, and one of them is that this is not something that we do alone. So although Vimalakirti is an individual, I think there's a case to be made for seeing him as representing a collective and what human beings are capable of as a collective and as a community. And I think there's a beautiful image for this in the text, which is that at a certain point, all of these monks go to see the Buddha, basically. I can't remember, it's probably thousands and thousands of monks, because everything is always thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of hundreds of thousands in the text. So all of these monks go to see the Buddha, and they're each carrying a parasol. So they're carrying a parasol because, in India it would be extremely hot and they want to protect themselves from the sun. You're each carrying a parasol, and when they go to see the Buddha, all of their parasols are transformed into one gigantic parasol that covers all of them. And I think that's an incredible image, isn't it? It's such a beautiful image. And what it says to me, it speaks to me of the fact that what we're talking about here, this ideal that we aspire to, that's not something that we can do alone. There are individual acts of kindness for sure, but they don't really get us very far. If we want to actually really, really change ourselves, and if we want to change society and we want to change the world around us, we need to do that together. That's a collective endeavour. And even on a much more mundane level, if we think about something like Banani's story, there's this individual triumph for her and this kind of landmark that she's reached. But there are hundreds of people that are involved in making that possible. And she then, in turn, will go on to influence hundreds of people in her life, in her community, in her village, and probably people that she'll meet later in her life. As somebody who's come from extreme grinding poverty and prejudice to somebody who is upright and fulfilled and energetic and has real hope for her life. It's collective conditions that have enabled her to get to that point, basically. That's not something that she could do on her own. But of course, we don't see that. We don't always see the conditions that go into that. So what Vimalakirti is saying is when we respond with kindness, or when we go beyond ourselves in the service of something higher, we can be much, much bigger than what we think we are, and we can achieve things that are way, way beyond what we think we can achieve. And that's a myth, that's an ideal, isn't it? Okay, so I'm going to move on to talking about something else, which is kind of like, it's sort of a talk in two halves. On the second half is I want to contrast that ideal. So I want to contrast what we'd call the Bodhisattva ideal or the Bodhisattva myth with what we have in our modern times. And so in our times, we don't have that myth, do we? We don't really look up to the idea of service, for example. It's got a pretty poor reputation in our culture. The idea of giving ourselves to something higher is not something we're really enthralled to in our culture. We live in a very, very individualistic culture, where it's very much about, individual achievement, individual success. The people that we look up to are kind of, perceived to be individuals that have sort of made it, whether it's, often, just people who've earned a lot of money, for example. I mean, I often think it's interesting in our culture, isn't it, that we use the word success when we often just mean rich. So we say somebody's successful when actually what we mean is they have a lot of money. They might be a very vindictive person, they might be really horrible to deal with, they might have done lots of really horrible things, but we call them successful because they have a lot of money. But the predominant myth in our culture, like the kind of the sort of the biggie, if you will, I think, is the romantic ideal, isn't it? So it's the myth of well, it's interesting, isn't it? I was saying with Vimalakirti that you could say that he's a superhero of compassion or a superhero of love. But if I say the phrase to you, true love, or real love, what does that conjure up for you? So you can virtually put your hands up in the virtual shrine room and see what that says to you. But in our culture, that's not about sacrificing oneself for greater good, is it? It's about the romantic ideal. The myth in our culture is basically that the ultimate fulfillment that you can find in life is through finding the right romantic partner, basically. What that myth says is that what you're waiting for in life, basically, is this particular feeling, like the feeling, yeah? And that's the way to complete fulfillment and happiness. And when you get that feeling about a certain person, it means that you've met the one. And then what you need to do is marry them. Never let them out of your sight. You should never want to change them because they're perfect as they are. They should never ask you to change. Because if they do, that means that they're not really the right person for you. And obviously the feeling was not quite the right feeling, and maybe you need to go and find the other one rather than the one. And if that relationship doesn't seem to be perfect, like if you want them to change or if you argue, that means that it's not this ideal, basically. And you shouldn't need anybody else. You shouldn't want anybody else. And that includes your friends. You shouldn't really need your friends anymore. You only need this one person. So, like every pop record is full of this, isn't it? Baby, you're all I need. You're the one, blah, 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 blah. You can work it out for yourselves, can't you? There's like thousands and thousands and thousands of pop songs and Hollywood movies. They're all about finding the one, aren't they? And you should always want to be together with that person. If you get bored when you're with them, or you get fed up, or you feel like you need some space, then there's something very, very wrong with you. It's funny, isn't it? Like, even just saying this makes it sound ridiculous. But that is the myth that we're given, isn't it? The last bit about always wanting to be with someone, I found it put me in mind of a story, which is I used to be a landlord years ago, believe it or not. I used to have this flat that I used to rent out in the north of England, and it had been the tenants had vacated it, and it had been empty for a few months. And I was talking to the letting agent, and I said, "Oh, look, it's been empty for a few months now." And it was around about this time of year. It was like mid-December. And I said, "I really need to get this let out, because I can't afford to cover the mortgage payments without the rent." And he said, "Oh yeah, don't worry about it." He said, "It'll go, 1st of January it'll go." And I was like, really? Like, surely people don't want to move in early January. He said, nah, trust me, it'll go 1st of January. And I said, well, why is that? He said, every year we see the same thing. Basically, people, at Christmas, people are forced to spend time together, and every year is basically full of people moving out and separating from their partners. And I thought, wow, really? And he said, yeah, trust me, 1st of January it'll go. So, okay. Sure enough, 2nd of January, I get a phone call. Yeah, we've got a tenant for you. And, we're laughing, but, it's interesting, isn't it? That thing, if that was really the case, if the romantic ideal was really the case, then this just would not happen, would it? But actually, if you're forced to spend time with people like that 24/7 with no distraction, no going to work, no job, personally, that would drive me up the wall slightly, I think. So there's not, I'm going to put a disclaimer here, don't get me wrong, I'm not down on romantic relationships. I'm in one myself. I've been in a relationship for a long time, 13 years, and I live with my partner, and we have a really lovely relationship, and it's very, very enjoyable. But I don't expect that relationship to completely fulfill me. I don't expect that is going to make me happy for the rest of my life just by the virtue of its existence. I also don't expect that person doesn't expect me to change, and I don't expect that we're never going to argue, and I don't expect that we're not going to get sick of each other from time to time. And this is the problem, is that with this myth, what it does is it just sets up completely unrealistic expectations. There's no way that is going to fulfill you. So we're asking of something that it just can't provide. What we all have as human beings is this kind of deep existential yearning for more and to grow. That is the human condition, is we're dissatisfied with who we are, and we want to become bigger. We want to transcend ourselves. But the problem with the romantic myth is it says that a relationship with one other person is going to do that for you, basically. It's going to allow you to completely transcend yourself. That's, in my experience at least, that is not true. It's false. So it sets up false expectations. It also makes people feel like there's something wrong with them if they don't want to do that, or they've not been able to do that in their life. And also what it does is it sets the bar extremely low. If all we're going to be about is finding somebody else who can make us happy, then, what does that set up, basically? What kind of world does that create? I think that's the problem with that myth, as opposed to when we think about the Bodhisattva ideal. So with that myth, it sets the bar too low, it sets up unrealistic expectations, and it's a myth in the sense of the word. It's interesting, that word myth, isn't it? That it can mean something bigger and greater than ourselves, that is hard to describe. But it can also just mean something that's untrue. And I think in the sense of the romantic myth, that is what it means, is it just means it's something also conveniently enough that is untrue. So let's not make that. So I think romantic relationships have their place. I think it's, that's fine if people want to do that. It's also fine if people don't want to do that. But let's not make that the pinnacle of what human beings can be. Let's not make that the highest thing that we possibly aspire to. Because at the moment, that's where that myth resides in our culture, isn't it? It's kind of like at the pinnacle, at the very top. So let's take it down and put it in its proper place, somewhere on a shelf about halfway up next to the tea bags or something like that. It's very, very nice. It's great. Can be really, really lovely. But it's definitely not what we should have as the pinnacle of what we aspire to. So I'm going to say three things that I think, three things about that. So I'm going to say three things about love that will take us towards starting to wrap things up. So the first thing is, let's think of love not as something that we get or we have or we find. Let's think of it as something that we create, and let's think of it as something that we create collectively. So it's something we create with others, and ideally, I think where that really starts to count is when we participate in that and when we create that as a community, and especially when we're able to do that as a community with other like-minded beings. So definitely, talking about Banani's story, like, I work for an organisation that is a community of people with higher values, similar higher values, that are trying to bring about change. And you could look at that and say, well, that's limited. It's, you're not changing the world, but we are sending huge amounts of money to these projects over there, and we're working with 50, 60 organisations. I think that's quite an achievement, and hundreds of thousands of people have benefited. And that's us as a community working with other communities in service of higher values. So that's something we create, and it's something we do as a community. So that's not something that we get, it's not something we have, and it's not something we find. We talk about finding love, it's not something we fall into either, even worse. Like, love being something that we fall into. Like, we're walking down the street one day and we fall into a manhole or something like that. Okay, so then the second thing I want to say is that we can always contribute to that, whether we feel like it or not. So this is the other thing, this is one of my other... I don't know if I sound a bit ranty here. Do I sound ranty? No, that's good. Okay, because it sounds a bit like I could sound a bit ranty. I'm really heard in saying that I'm not. So, as I said, I am saying this as a man who is in one of those relationships. But yeah, the other thing is that the romantic ideal, it's all about feelings, isn't it? It's all about the feeling, and it's all about your feelings. You do something because you have feelings for someone, or you stop doing something because you've stopped having feelings for them. Feelings are a really flimsy thing to base your life on. You really don't want to base your life on feelings. And love and compassion is something that you can do whether you feel like it or not. All of us here this evening, probably I would imagine that on a cold winter's evening like this, there'd be a point today where we thought, I don't really feel like doing this. I don't always feel like doing everything that I know is the right thing to do. You don't need to feel like doing something in order to do it. And then paradoxically, I think if you go beyond your feelings into doing something that you know is the right thing, or doing something in service of higher values, then you actually do feel like doing it pretty quickly, and you can train yourself, and you always feel good about having done it because you've gone beyond your feelings of whether you feel like it or not, or whether your likes and dislikes and so on. And then the third thing I would say is, let's expand our horizons. So let's expand our horizons beyond what we think we are capable of, personally and as a community, and let's expand our horizons in terms of who and how we love as well. So I think the text really points to this very, very beautifully. Just to come back to the Vimalakirti Nirdesa, in the text what you find all the time is everything on a massive, massive scale. So you have these realms called Buddha lands, where everything is infinite, and there are millions and billions of jewels falling from the most, these incredibly huge trees, and mountains that are bigger than anything we could possibly imagine, and millions and billions and trillions of bodhisattvas arriving in these Buddha lands. What I think that is pointing to is that we need to have a sense of perspective, that love and compassion and wisdom is infinite, and we are extremely small, basically. We need to go beyond this preoccupation with this tiny, tiny little corner of the universe that inhabits our body and our mind. And we need to think much, much, much bigger than that. And I think that's what Vimalakirti is pointing to with these Buddha lands and this kind of scale, is that we can go beyond. We think that the universe is like, something that ends about 10 feet away from us all the time. But it's not. It's infinite, and we can become much bigger than we are and grow towards that infinite compassion and that infinite love. And if you don't know where to start, well, then just start by, even on a mundane level, expanding who you are kind to and who you are loving towards. Going beyond being kind to somebody because we expect something from them, or we want them to be a certain way. So going beyond like love for a partner or our own family, even starting with our friends, for example. Making friends with people who we wouldn't necessarily normally be attracted to, or being kind to our friends as well as our partner, but going even beyond that and participating in a community, being loving or being compassionate to people that we will never even meet, to complete strangers. So just to come back to Banani, it's only possible for those kind of changes to happen in her community because people that she will never, ever, ever meet have been contributing financially to the project that has helped her. So the charity that I work for is supported by, I think it's about 9,500 people who give some money every month from their salary to support the organisations that we work with. So they'll never ever meet those people, and yet they contribute. They do something for people that they've never even met and they never will meet. And we can do that as well. We can be kind to people where there's no particular interest for us. We might never even meet those people. And we can do that in all sorts of different ways, can't we? We can give our time, perhaps that's the most valuable thing we can do. We can give our time to other people, or we can give our time to a community or a group of people. We can do practical things, supporting people in practical ways. We can give our concern, and also, just like I was saying, we can just give money. That's one of the things that we can do, which is actually really, really helpful. All organisations like that need money. We need money here at the London Buddhist Centre. We can't do what we do unless people support us financially. So I'm going to start to wrap up, and I was thinking about this on the way here, sometimes I have these little benchmarks for the way I think about things and whether something is worth doing or not, or whether I should do something or not. And so a few weeks ago I mentioned this thing called the rocking chair test, which is sometimes when I'm trying to make a decision, I think, okay, well, when I look back from the end of my life, what am I going to think about this decision? Will I be happy that I've made this decision? Is this the way I want to live my life when I look back on it? And in relation to what I'm talking about this evening, there's another little tool that I use, which is that I think, okay, well, if I'm going to do something, or I'm thinking about doing something or not doing something, what I do is I universalize that, and I think, what if everybody did this thing? So what if everybody behaved in a certain way? And I was thinking about this in relation to the romantic ideal, putting this what I was talking about this evening together. And I was thinking, if that is what love was all about, because the other thing to say about this as well is that is literally a construct. I think it's so much the water that we swim in that we think somehow that is truth. But it's only a very, very recent way of looking at the world. This whole idea didn't really exist a few hundred years ago. It's been invented quite recently. And if that was what, and it's also unique to certain cultures, it's not a kind of worldwide phenomenon. And if that was what the whole world was about, so if everybody in the world subscribed to that myth and was primarily concerned pretty much only with finding a partner and making themselves happy, like what kind of world would that be? We wouldn't have a situation like we have with Banani. We wouldn't have organisations like ours. We wouldn't, well, you can use your imagination. It would be a very, very impoverished world, I think, literally, financially and spiritually. So Vimalakirti, just to bring it back to Vimalakirti, is, you could say, in a way represents something that way, way, way transcends that. So he's not real, but what he does is, if we open up to him and we think about what he represents, and we allow that myth or that ideal to influence us or inspire us, then though he's not real, he will inspire us to behave in different ways in the real world. By doing that, in a way, you could say that we bring him into existence. And in doing that, we go beyond ourselves with other people, and we create a world where there is more love and more compassion. And we sort of bring Vimalakirti into the world in that way. And it's almost like we start to create one of these Buddha lands that is talked about in the text. Creating a world where people are freer, where they're more valued, and they're growing beyond themselves, growing in wisdom and compassion all the time. Okay, so let's take a short break for 5 minutes or so, and after the break I'll maybe talk for a few more minutes, and then there'll be time for questions, and Amelie Yoden and myself will do our best to answer your questions. And so you can put your questions in the chat during the break, or you can think about those for when we come back. But right now we'll take a short break. We'll take a break for about 5 minutes or so. So we'll come back just before 8:05. Okay.
Great. Good to see everybody again. So yeah, hopefully you've all settled back from your break, had an opportunity to get a cup of tea or a glass of water, whatever you need. So yeah, thank you very, very much, Akashamitra, for that talk. I was rejoicing in Akashamitra's teaching style there during the break. I was saying it was more via negativa than the way that we sometimes get, which is often very via positiva. So via negativa would be a don't do this as opposed to do this. Of course, the via positiva, perfectly fine way to teach as well, but I think we need a mix of don't do this as well as do this. So how not to love, I thought was very, very interesting, very topical. So I really enjoyed it. So we are going to have some time for questions now. Why don't you get your questions into the chat box if you still have some. Akashamitra, you were saying you were just a few things to add on to that as well.
Yeah. Well, just one thing from what you were saying actually, which I think is kind of we'll probably get to this in the questions, but we were talking about this in the break, weren't we? That thing of saying don't do that. In a sense, I'm not saying don't do that. What I'm saying is don't only do that. And you don't have to do that as well. Right. Like don't let romantic love be our ceiling, basically, because it's a pretty low bar, I think. But obviously, do that as well if you want to. I'm doing that, so to speak. And then the other thing I just wanted to say actually was just another little example about how participating in that. In a community and sort of service of higher values can really change us and sort of change people's lives. And I partly wanted to say this because it brought to mind a friend of mine who she died almost exactly 10 years ago. And so you might be able to see behind us that we have, I don't know if you can see this far back, but at the back we have these little stupas on the shrine, and we have these like little objects, and they hold people's ashes. And you probably can't see this, but over there is the ashes of Vidya Jyoti, who was this friend of mine who died. And I was thinking about her mainly just because it's almost exactly the 10th anniversary of her death. She died. Next week it will be 10 years since she died, basically. And I was thinking a bit about her. And when I first came along here, I got to know her quite well. She became a very, very close friend of mine. And I was with her when she died, and that's the first time I've been at somebody's bedside when they've died. It was very, very moving to be with her through her illness. She died of cancer. It was with her all through her illness, and then at her side when she died. And the way she was supported through her death by the community around the London Buddhist Centre was just incredibly moving for me. I really felt at that time that I saw what was possible when human beings come together. I mean, one story comes to mind that she was in hospital just down the road here in Whitechapel, and the nurses took somebody aside one night and they said, it's like, is she an actress or is she a celebrity or something? And they were like, no. They said, because we're just getting so many cards. Like, they were getting hundreds of cards, and there was a constant, stream of visitors to our bedside. In the end, we had to limit that and say, that we could only have sort of one person at a time or two people at a time, because she was so well loved and so well appreciated. And I think, what would that have been like if she hadn't been part of this community? A 72-year-old woman, she was American, she wasn't in her home country. And, people die alone, don't they? And they died lonely. And she didn't. She died surrounded by love. She said just before her death, she said, I feel like I've won the lottery, and I don't have time to spend my winnings. And what she meant by that was, she said for the first time in her life she realised how loved she was. And I found that incredibly moving. And her funeral was just the most moving thing I'd ever been to in my life at that point. And it really, really cemented my commitment to this community. It was soon after that I became a mitra, and I decided that I wanted to train for ordination and so on. I thought I'd just share that with you. And also on the day that she died, I got this email, and I had a look at this today, and I just thought it was a really nice little synchronicity with what I'm talking about tonight. So I'm just going to read that to you. A friend of hers, Pranya Devi, who's some of you might know, who's an order member here, she was a good friend of hers, and she sent out this email after she died. So it said, Vidya Jyoti, our beautiful friend, died today at 5:23 GMT, Tuesday 21st of December 2010, 2 days before her 72nd birthday. She has touched so many lives and is so loved. We will miss her so. To love and be loved, it is all that matters. It is the only thing that matters. Vidya Jyoti did very well on both counts. I thought that was really lovely, and partly I just wanted to mention her as tribute to her, really, because she was a very well loved part of this community, and it's coming up to the 10th anniversary of her death. So, yeah. Yep. So that's that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very moving. Little message just there, particularly at the end. But yeah, thank you. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go to questions now, folks. So I'll read them out. Benji will feed them to me, and we can read them out, and we can do our very best to answer them. So if you have any there, Benji.
Yeah, we've got quite a few questions.
Right.
Mercha asks, why do you think symbols and myths, such as Vimalakirti's one, communicate ideals better than just rational discourse?
So Mercha was asking, why do symbols and myths, such as the one that Vimalakirti represents, communicate values and ideals better than just rational discourse? What do you think about that, Akashamitra?
No, would you be able to? Well, I like answering questions with you, because it often, like, we can converse a little bit, can't we? So I don't know if I can fully answer that question, but I would start us off by saying it's mysterious, isn't it? I think human beings, I think consciousness is mysterious, and our depth are mysterious, and somehow myths talk to our depths in ways that the rational just can't. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, so many people that I've met have even come to the Buddhist path because they've seen an image of the Buddha, for example. And if you just had a piece of text that said, well, the Buddha was this man, he lived to blah, 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 it just wouldn't work, would it? But somehow an image, or even like some lines of poetry or something like that, they can really speak to us, can't they? They can speak to our depths in a way that somehow the sort of the rational can't. I don't quite know why that is. I don't know if it's even possible to answer that question, really. But
no, I think that's right, actually. I mean, it sort of just seems to be, well, it just is the case. Yeah. It just is the case. Most of us seems to be, in terms of what we're moved by, inspired by, turned on by, even in that regard, is seems to be of this kind of poetic, mythical, imaginative world, isn't it? And of course, we all have experience of this, just being shot into another world by a scene in a play, or a line of poetry, or a piece of music, or something like that. And of course, we don't know why it is, but it just seems to be the case. So I think it's worth remembering as well, in terms of how much input we give to the logical and the rational. Not that there's anything wrong with the logical and the rational, but that really where we're nourished is actually the imaginative. Really where we're moved is really imaginative as well. Yeah. So just seems to be the case. So we've probably not done a fantastic job at answering that, Mercha, but hopefully we've given some sense of it. Yeah. Any of this there, Brendan?
Oliver asks, so does Buddhism not believe in the notion of falling in love with someone? And he also asks, for Buddhists to be in a relationship with, does the other person have to be a Buddhist too?
So Oliver was asking, do Buddhists not believe in the idea of falling in love? And for Buddhists to be in a relationship, does the other person have to be a Buddhist too? I mean, just to take the first part of that question, I think probably what Akashamitra was getting at with him, we weren't having a downer on falling in love, because of course falling in love is a fantastic experience. It's great. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, that first sort of feeling of falling in love, and all the world is colour and warmth and everything is fantastic. I mean, who would want to deny somebody that? And of course, actually, it's talked about in the other spiritual traditions in a sense of, say for example in Sufism, it's talked about as the beloved. So looking to point out something of that experience of falling in love, and there's something valuable in it from a kind of even from a spiritual perspective, the value of falling in love. But really what you're looking to do in that case, particularly what they're pointing at, is you're falling in love with life. The beloved becomes the highest ideal, your higher ideals, and you're falling in love with that ideal. So I think we can, in that sense, we can look to fall in love. I think what Akashamitra was getting at, maybe you might say a bit more about Akashamitra, but I think what he was getting at was this whole idea that you'd somehow just fall in love as if you were hit by a meteor or fell into a manhole, as you were saying. It's like it was some sort of passive experience or something that you couldn't help. And of course we choose to fall in love, don't we? It's not the case that we just randomly fall in love with people, and we always choose not to fall in love a lot of the time as well. We choose not to fall in love because the person's inappropriate, or we choose to fall in love because they're too young, or because they're married, or because they're the secretary at work and it wouldn't work, and all of those sorts of things. Or
people don't always choose that, do they?
But we choose a lot of the time not to. So I think it's sort of pointing to this idea that it's not that quite a passive a thing, is it?
Yeah, that's right. And also that okay, that's a feeling, but you also then choose what you do with that as well. So whether that means acting on it, or acting on it for the long term, or I think that's what I was trying to get at, is that you've got a very strong set of feelings there, but that doesn't. So for example, I mean, probably we're getting too much into specifics here, but for example, just because you fall in love with someone, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're somebody that you is the best person for you to be having a relationship with, or not having a relationship with, or that if you don't have those feelings, that you somehow can't make a meaningful connection with. But interesting, going back to what you were saying about Sufism, they I don't know whether this is mythic or whether it's actually true, but I heard a story that what they used to do was basically get a young man to fall in love with a woman and then basically kidnap him and kind of separate him from her. And that's funny, it's interesting, and also I think there's really something in that. Like that, if that's mythic, I think it's an interesting myth. Because what that's saying, and I think this comes back to your question, Oliver, is like, okay, so you have this feeling, but then if you depersonalize that and take away the person that you're projecting that onto, what you have is something much, much, much more, you have much more potential there. That what you recognize is this feeling is within you. It's nothing to do with them. What we often think when we fall in love with someone is it's because they are this incredible human being. But if that was the case, it just wouldn't work, would it? Because everyone would fall in love with the same person, and I'm sure you've had the experience sometimes where your friend introduces you to their amazing new partner, who's this most incredible, and you meet them and you sort of like, okay, I can't quite see it myself, but it's in you. That's the thing. It's such a horrendous cliche, isn't it? But it's what beauty is in the eye of the beholder. These are feelings that are in you. And given that, we have the potential to extend that much, much, much more widely and more deeply. And through doing that, we can create something that is about much, much more than just our personal happiness. And then there was a second part to
well, maybe, hopefully you'll be happy with the first part being answered, Oliver.
Well, I might say something.
You might want to go
into
the second part. So this idea that do you have to live with somebody that also be in partnership with somebody that's Buddhist? Yeah. I
mean, I would just say no to that. But what I would say is, as with anything really, if you have a particular set of values it's very, very difficult to maintain those values if you're spending time with people who are constantly challenging them, or you're sort of butting up against that, or coming up against something that's contrary to that. So I don't think it's necessarily the case that if you're a Buddhist, you need to have a relationship with someone who's a Buddhist, and that's definitely not the case. But I do think it helps to, if you're going to be in a relationship with someone, to at least have similar values and to be supportive of their values as well. So yeah, that's sort of on a practical note, but yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah, there's that ending.
Question from Mehmet. He's asking, how do you go from having a main goal of finding someone and giving them all of your love to expanding that to loving oneself and everyone?
So Mehmet was asking, how would you go from a main goal of finding somebody to fall in love with to expanding that to falling in love with everyone? So it might be good just to qualify, because of course we're using the same word love here in both instances, aren't we? And it might be good just to qualify with what exactly we'd be talking about in the Buddhist case, particularly with Vimalakirti and the Bodhisattva Myth. So really what Vimalakirti is pointing to is this quality of Maitri or metta, which could be translated as love, but also could be translated as well-wishing, friendliness, all of those things. What would be translated in the terms of romantic love that we've been sort of comparing it to is probably something closer to pema, which is a sticky love or a sticky affection. And so those two things are slightly different. With metta, really what's been got at is a totally unattached love. So a love that's completely sort of unconcerned with we're going to get out of it, basically. A love undertaken for the sheer joy in seeing other people grow, for the sheer liberation from the petty concerns of self that comes with it. A sort of just a total concern for the other and a dropping of regard and concern for the self, with all the freedom that brings. So that's really what we're talking about with this quality of metta or maitri or friendly, or you could talk about friendliness. With pema, and I think it's worthwhile kind of talking about this with the quality of romantic love, is that so often romantic love, it's a very attached thing, isn't it? It's very sort of, we want that person for ourselves. It can be very selfish, can't it? We want that person for ourselves. The idea that they'd be happy without us would, of course, drive us mad. It would be mad, very upsetting. The idea that they'd go off with somebody else would be very upsetting. And of course, a romantic love, and I've seen it, and you all will have seen it, can turn into hate very quickly, because the stickiness and the craving of that relationship, when it goes sour, can so easily turn into ill will, can so easily turn into frustrated craving, and ill will is so often frustrated craving. So there's a slightly different quality between the love of the Bodhisattva and the romantic love of and romantic love. Now, of course, I'm painting extreme pictures here. Of course, that is not all romantic. Of course, not all romantic relationships are like that, and often friendship is tainted by craving as well. So those are kind of like generalized ways of looking at it, but a way of generally talking about it. So I think we probably have to be aware of that. How you actually go changing from one to the other, I mean, I don't even know, do you think you do that?
Yeah, I think we can train ourselves, can't we? That's the thing. And I think you just practices like the Metta Bhavana, for example, and just practicing being ethical and practicing being kinder. Because I think, I probably did make this clear, but just to reiterate, what I was talking about was an ideal. So the Bodhisattva ideal is an ideal, And that's not something that we can just jump to. If we try to jump to just being really selfless all the time, we can't do it. It just it sort of inverts itself, and we end up, it's sort of like a weird form of neediness or something, isn't it? So we need a really good solid base of self-metta and self-esteem. We need to become a sort of healthy human being first. And all during that process, we can become more other-regarding, so we can widen our circle of reference. As I said, we can look beyond ourselves or our partner, and we can start being kinder to other people, but also just participating in a community. I don't know where you are, Mehmet, but if, for example, if you're able to come to the Buddhist Center and participate in classes, and just sort of expanding our sort of our field of compassion, really, and also just meditation will do that for you as well. If you stay with that practice, particularly the metta bhavana, what you're doing there is sort of reorientating your depths, really, so that you become over time more other-regarding and more compassionate, and you relate to people on that basis, not because you want something from them. It's all there in the practice, isn't it? We start off thinking of ourselves, then a good friend, and so on and so on. And it's almost like that practice is a sort of an image for that retraining over time. But it does take time. It's an ideal that we're talking about. It's not something that we can just jump to.
Yeah. Okay, folks.
So we might have to start wrapping
We might have to wrap it up there,
great.
exactly.
Thanks for your questions. Really, really, really good to hear all of those. And
And thank you, Akashamitra, for the talk. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So what we'll do is I'll just say a little bit about our culture of love at the LBC and the way that we best try to express that. And I think Akashamitra talked a little bit about that in the first half, that an aspect of metta, an aspect of love, is metta for, in the sense of this universal love, is metta for people that we've never seen before. So Karana, the organisation that Akashamitra works for, and I worked for many years, got to know Akashamitra through that great organisation, operates because people feel something for people that they'll never meet halfway across the world, and they give money because they feel something for those people that they'll never meet. They're motivated by that, and of course to be human is to be motivated by that too, to want to give, even though we'll get nothing from that in return except for the feeling that we've done some good, the knowledge that we've done some good for somebody. So what the LBC looks to do is it really wants to encourage this sense of giving and this generosity, even if we might never come into connection with the person that we have benefited. So we put on these classes here for free. We look to do it out of generosity. The teachers here give their time for free. And we do it because it's of service to this higher ideal of metta for all living beings, irrespectively, without regard for ourselves. And we really just ask you to join in that vision. So the centre here runs on the basis of dana, of generosity. We couldn't get by without it. We've been very, very dependent on it during lockdown. And we really need for people to give us money so that we can go out and hand on that vision of love, that vision of friendship to people that you'll never meet, probably that you'll never meet. You might meet some of them, but many of them you never will. And so we'd really invite you to join in that vision with us. We really, really depend on you. One of the conditions that we need to spread the Dharma is for you to help us in that way. So if you're in a position to do that, we really, really appreciate it. Benji will have put up the link there on how to donate, so you'll see that in the chat box. And please do, if you're in a position to do so and move to do so, we really, really appreciate it.
Do you want to just say something quickly about the winter retreat?
Oh yes, that's probably a good idea. Well, why don't you mention it, Akashamitra?
Yeah, so just to say that we're running an online winter retreat this year. Every year what we do is, normally we run even more than one retreat. And obviously this year is a little bit different. So the winter retreat that we're running is going to be online. But that's from the 27th of December to the 1st of January. And I'll be on the team for that, and I'll be doing the morning meditations, and there'll be groups, there'll be sort of dharmic input and teaching, and there'll be classes every evening and so on. And the thing about being on a retreat is it's a way of practicing where you're coming into relationship with other people as well. So it's different from just tuning into a class here and there. It's really, really lovely. I was a bit sceptical around sort of start of lockdown about whether it's possible to do a retreat online properly. But I've been really, really moved by taking part in online retreats this year. It's a very, very good thing to do. And we just really invite you to join in with that, basically. So Benji will put a link in the chat, and you can have a look and see if that's something you'd like to do. It's free. It's on a donation basis, so you can just give as much as you want for that as well. And just do join us for that. It would be very, very nice, and hope to see some of you there. Yeah.
Brilliant. Great. Well, hopefully see you there, folks, and see you again next week. And we'll leave it there for this evening. Take care.